spring into line, and with no picnickers to harass yet at this early hour, turning their lively interest to the latest additions to their dominion. One was attempting to climb the peppermint-striped helter-skelter, sliding back down each time with an audibly disgruntled quack. Another was poking its head beneath the Punch and Judy tent, whilst a third was, apparently unaware of the irony, swimming around in the hooker-duck pool. Despite himself, Colin couldn't resist a small smile of gratification at the chaos they were causing. The organisers of the Georgian Fair were going to have a job on their hands when they got down here to set up later. Bells were chiming from somewhere close by, breaking the morning hush. They could be coming from any of the 5 medieval churches which clustered within the town's nucleus, but in any case, they made Colin's heart jolt in alarm. He fumbled for his watch, turning it on his bony wrist and squinting at the tiny gold batons. Long vision aside, he had to admit that his short vision was getting worse by the month. She'd be sitting up in bed by now, plump fingers drumming impatiently on the quilted bedcovers, wondering why her morning cup of tea and local newspaper was late. In truth, the paper was a habit he'd instilled, an excuse to get out for his early stroll. A brief, glorious moment of peace and solitude, when the sky was pearled with blue, the meadows glittered with moisture, and his only company was the odd half-asleep runner or the fluted song of the missel thrush from high in the trees. But with the sound of those bells, the enchantment was broken. They were a warning, a clanging reminder that he was running out of time. All too soon, the town bridge would bloom with the red of brake lights, wooden shutters peeling back from the surrounding windows to welcome in the morning sun, and he would have to return to the ire of a wife who had become more refractory and caustic than ever of late. Usually he would make the natural assumption that it was down to something he'd done. That was generally a safe bet. But in this instance, for once, he didn't think that was the case. It had all started, he thought, with a retrospective bristle, when that police sergeant had come to the house during the investigation in the spring. It had been a thorough mix-up, of course. Colin and Margaret had just happened to be at the auction, and they'd just happened to be standing next to the wardrobe, as Margaret had expounded since. How were they supposed to know that there was a body in there? Was one expected to be prepared for corpses in all manner of strange places these days? Is that what the world was coming to? And it had been by pure chance that they'd needed to go back for Colin's forgotten scarf. But by this point, the police had got it into their heads that they'd been acting suspiciously, and... Anyway, it had just been one of those ridiculous coincidences. The very thought of Colin and Margaret being involved. Such upstanding, long-time residents of Stamford, which had become apparent when they'd finally arrested the right person, also, come to think of it, an upstanding, long-time resident of Stamford, but that was besides the point. But not before the police had tried to get access to Margaret's cleaning room. Colin shivered beneath his thin anorak at the mere memory. Her prized space. Even he didn't have a key. He tried to explain that to the officers, but they hadn't seemed very sympathetic. And then Margaret had come home, and she'd been so furious. He'd never seen her like that before. Not in all their married life. He would never admit it out loud, but it had almost frightened him a little. That had all been bad enough on its own, but then that woman had come, later on, after the arrests. Colin hadn't heard what was discussed between them, and he'd never dared to ask. Margaret hadn't mentioned it since, but he could tell that the whole episode had upset her deeply. He'd since told himself, rather insightfully, he liked to think, that it was all bound to have shaken her up a bit. After all, a sensitive woman like his Margaret, well, she just felt things so. No, by far the best thing he could do was keep his head down, spend as much time in his train shed at the bottom of the garden as humanly possible, and generally try not to aggravate her any more than was strictly necessary. With that in mind now, he stepped a loafer-shod foot forwards, prepared to hurry on home. He began to cross the meadows, although he hadn't got far before something crunched beneath his sole. He hesitated, looking down in perplexity. Glass twinkled like crushed ice on the lush grass. Shaking his head in faint disapproval, Colin stepped gingerly.